Continuing our conversation now with former presidential advisor and presidential candidate and political commentator Pat Buchanan, J.D. Hayworth, joined by John Bogman and Dave Padden. John, you've got something for Pat.
Yeah, Mr. Buchanan, I wanted to follow up on something that J.D. was talking about, something we reported at the very beginning of the hour of this show, and that is the fact that the United States is now going to be open to discussions with Iran. Under Secretary of State William Burns going to meet with a member of the Iranian delegation in Vienna, the same group that's talking about the nuclear situation in Iran. How do you feel about us being in this position, about negotiating and working with the Iranians on an issue like this? It's kind of like, bizarre world, isn't it?
No, it's like working with Joe Stalin in World War II when you're fighting Hitler. No, I don't have a real problem with it in this sense. And if the United States is not going to go in and defend Baghdad for that government and for that country, and I don't think we should, and the Iranians volunteer to do it, I would not be opposed to that at all. But we ought to know if the Iranians go in there, they're not likely to be leaving soon. I think they can probably defend Baghdad. But that, along with the Shia south of Iraq, will make for an Iranian-Iraqi alliance, and I think Iraq will come apart. You ought to know the consequences of it, but I wouldn't object to it.
So you see potentially a two-state Iraq, a northern Iraq led by the Sunnis and the southern state led by the Shias?
I see a three-state Iraq. I think Kurdistan's going to break loose. I think they've got Kirkuk. I don't know if they're going to go all the way to independence. That'll depend on the Turks and the others. But and then in the west, I don't think the Sunni heartland out there in Anbar, I don't think the Iraqi army has got the ability to recapture it after they've lost it. And my guess would be that the Iranians, even if they went in, would not go into the Sunni tribal areas because there would be a hellish war there. And I'm not sure the Shia would win. We are looking at a Sunni-Shia war across the entire region.
So, Pat, David Patton here, you mentioned that you didn't think that they'd go into those Sunni regions, but wouldn't that leave America and really all of the nations that have been threatened by this ISIS group, threatened by the possibility of a terror attack? Wouldn't they still have a base of operations? Question number one. And then secondly, could you address what you see, the legacy, the impact on Hillary Clinton's political situation with, more bad news coming out of the Middle East here on this situation?
All right. Well, ISIS has already had for over a year now a base camp in Syria, and they're focused first on taking western Iraq and creating their so-called caliphate state, all the rest of it. I'm less concerned about the fact that they've got territory than just what you've described, David, which is these cells start working and planning and moving to come into the West and the United States of America. And that's something we have been defending against and we're going to have to defend against, and maybe the threat is going to grow. But that's not an argument for sending Marines back to Fallujah. So in that case, we're just going to have to deal with it. As for Hillary Rodham Clinton, I mean, she made one big vote in her entire career in the Senate, and that was to go into Iraq, and she now admits she made a mistake. I would like to have someone tell me exactly what she accomplished as Secretary of State. Barack Obama's foreign policy is going to be perceived as an utter failure in 2016, and she was a co-architect of that policy. So I think she's going to find a way to skedaddle away from Barack Obama as fast as she can, but I don't know how she does it.
Well, Pat, Dave brought up presidential politics, and obviously you've had firsthand experience with that. Let's turn now and talk about...
I've lost a few, J.D.
Well, but we learn from finishing second, Pat. I can say the same thing about legislative races for the House and Senate. Now, before we go, another important story embroiled in politics. Last time you were here, you said you believe Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor would bring forth some sort of amnesty for the illegal children crossing our border. Now, Mr. Cantor, in historic fashion, has been removed or is about to be removed from the leadership. Do you see Speaker Boehner moving forward with some sort of modified DREAM Act amnesty despite what's happened with Eric Cantor?
J.D., the voters of the 7th District of Virginia have just run a stake through amnesty and the DREAM Act, certainly for 2014 and very probably for 2015 and 2016. I think the Republican caucus, as I think it was Steve King said, if Boehner now tries to bring up the DREAM Act or amnesty or limited amnesty or a path to citizenship, he will blow up the caucus. I don't believe he will do it. Why would the Republicans start a war in their own caucus when they look like they're headed for a victory this November?
And yet this leadership race taking place this week, Pat, you've got a situation where Raul Labrador has become, the gentleman from Idaho has become the grassroots candidate, even though Raul has gone back and forth on the question of, quote, comprehensive immigration reform. And border hawks like Steve King aren't really happy with Congressman Labrador. What do you see happening in this leadership race?
Well, it looks like Mr. McCarthy, who I'm sure you know, is going to come in and take Cantor's job. And I'm not sure about the majority whip. I agree with you, the leadership may still be pro-DREAM Act or pro-amnesty, but again, I don't think even the leadership, if that's what it believes, is going to go with the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable against the clearly expressed will of the people in the Republican Party and the voters and the activists. So even if, JD, if the leadership moves somewhat in the pro-amnesty direction, I don't think the caucus is going to move in that direction. I would be terribly surprised unless the folks in the leadership of the caucus don't want to be there in 2015.
Well, the situation is, as people move up the ranks, Pat, the inherent danger for the House Republican Conference is appearing to again deny the electoral will of conservatives, but internal politics in the House are different from electoral politics nationwide.
I think again, when you see what happened to Cantor, you know, what is the statement that if you hang a man, it will certainly convince the others that maybe they not ought to do what the other fella did. And I think this is what's going to happen. I just don't believe that Boehner and the leadership are going to take up the DREAM Act or amnesty. And you can call me wrong if they do by this November. And again, I don't think they're going to do it for the next 2 years.
Pat Buchanan, we would never call you wrong. Right, wrong, you're always interesting. And as another book you wrote said, you're right from the beginning. Patrick Buchanan, we appreciate your time this morning on America's Forum. So that's Pat's take on some key questions. We want to get your take. Why don't you tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. There's also email, connect@newsmaxtv.com. And don't forget Facebook.